Hey guys, it's Cecil. I'm making this video to help Gary TurboCobra out a little bit. I walked him through it a little bit on the phone last night, but this is also for the rest of you guys that are having any difficulty with electric motors and capacitor start motors. The air compressor motor on my compressor and also on Gary's and probably a lot of the others that you guys have are capacitor start, capacitor run motors more than likely. That means there are two on here, and this is the start capacitor on mine. Usually the start capacitor is slightly bigger than the run capacitor. I think the problem that Gary was having with his, since it would start over but it wouldn't continue to run, is probably the run capacitor is probably bad. Unfortunately, most people don't have a capacitor tester. There are different ways you could test it with an analog type meter where you touch the terminals to the probes and then reverse the polarity and it'll kick over and back, but that really doesn't give you a true reading of the farad output on them, which is how they are rated, the microfarads. But just as an example, I went ahead and turned the breaker off to mine. Of course, here's the breaker and I've got it shut off. Now I already tested to make sure I had no power. One thing you got to watch with capacitors, if they are bad, they can hold a charge. So I took the screws out which hold this to the side of the compressor motor, and let's find my screwdriver here, I'll lay it down. Before you touch any of the live parts of it, what you want to do is take your screwdriver and basically just go in there and touch, or I didn't have enough light in here, touch one terminal to the other. And if it has any residual charge to it, it'll pop, and that basically discharges it so that you won't get a shock. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pull these off. I'm not sure, I don't have my tripod over here. But these are in there pretty good. Stand by just a second. Let me set you up over here on the car. And of course it ain't going to sit up. So, but these are wedged in there pretty tight, and sometimes you may have to take a screwdriver or something to kind of pop them out. Just be careful and try not to break them, because they're not real expensive. I was looking them up on Granger this morning for, like I said, to help Gary. And the star capacitors are usually kind of expensive. The ones that I looked at in this range right here were somewhere around, I think, $20 to $30, which is more than what I told him on the thing last night. The run capacitors usually aren't quite as expensive. I'm not sure if that's going to focus or not. I can't really tell through the view screen. But this is like 161 to 193 microfarads, and it'll also tell you the voltage, which that doesn't always necessarily match up with a 220 volt input voltage on your air compressor, so don't let that alarm you. This one does in fact say 250, but a lot of times you can go to your local HVAC store, if you're lucky enough like Gary is to have a Granger store nearby. That's who I deal with for about all of my motor needs as far as capacitors, actual electrical motors and everything else. Now this is the run capacitor over here, and it's just slightly different, and it is it's a 20 microfarad 370 volt. This is, like I said, the actual run capacitor. And the way these things are set up, I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you up inside the motor now without taking the end housing off, but these actually have a centrifugal switch up inside here on the back part of the motor. You can kind of see it right there. And what happens, the pressure switch tells the motor it's time to run, and that actually starts over on this capacitor until it reaches a certain RPM level, in which case the weights on that actually sling out and close the starting circuit. And as long as the motor is running fast enough, the starting capacitor is basically out of the circuit, and it's relying solely on the run capacitor to keep it running. And that's why I kind of theorized with Gary's that since it was starting over, that it was probably the run capacitor. But the one exception to that is if it wasn't going fast enough for it to kick those weights out on that centrifugal switch, it may have been staying stuck in the start loop and finally overheating and turning off. Another thing that some folks had mentioned was the check valve, which is right here on mine. Basically that does two things. It keeps the pressure from going back into the compressor head, but it also has a blow off on it whenever the compressor reaches the pressure that it's set to, which I think mine is factory set at like 130. Once it shuts off, it actually bleeds out the pressure between the head and the fitting itself, so that it doesn't try to start the compressor up under full load, because that would be almost impossible for the compressor motor to start it. And some folks theorize that maybe his check valve was bad. That's a distinct possibility, but the way the motor was acting to me, like I said, it was either the start or the run capacitor, with the run capacitor being the most likely subject. So I would start with those two things, and if it still didn't act right, or if it didn't shut off, I would look at that. Another thing too is the points inside the pressure switch itself. Generally, the problem I've had with those was that they got welded shut, just like points in a car, and what would happen with that is it wouldn't shut off. So in which case, if that happened, there's usually a safety device on here somewhere, which mine is way back up underneath here. That little thing right here with this, that is actually your safety release if something were to happen and the pressure switch did not shut the air compressor off in order to keep it from having a catastrophic failure of the tank. This opens up at a given pressure, which is above the operating pressure of the compressor, and actually vents the air pressure off of the tank to keep it from exploding. So it's not very often the points in these things stick. It's kind of like pressure points on a well pump, very similar technology. And if they do stick, a lot of times I have turned the power off and taken a piece of like 220 grit fine sandpaper and took the cover off and kind of stuck them in there and cleaned them up just a little bit. You don't really want to mess with this too much. You can increase or decrease your operating pressure some, but there again, if you go to messing with it a whole lot, you run the risk of this thing right here opening up and letting your air pressure off. So, you know, these things are relatively dangerous, so you got to kind of watch what you do to them and how. That's why I wanted to kind of make this video and give you guys a little bit of insight on the electrical part of it. So hopefully this helps everybody out, and if anybody's got any questions, or if I'm incorrect in any of the statements I've made, please correct me, because I think that what I'm telling you is the truth, at least as I know it. But if I'm mistaken, I would like to know the correct thing. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll be talking to y'all later.